The gunshot echoed across the barren plains, startling Naomi Porter from her concentration. She looked up from the worn ledger, her fingers stained with ink, heart racing as she listened for any sign of trouble approaching her father's general store in Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876. The town had been peaceful for months, but peace in these parts was as fleeting as summer rain. Naomi tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and moved to the window, squinting against the harsh midday sun. A lone rider approached from the east, slumped in his saddle. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. "Pa," she called, closing the ledger. "Someone's coming, looks hurt." Walter Porter emerged from the back room, wiping flour from his hands. At 53, he moved more slowly these days, but his eyes remained sharp. "Might be trouble, Naomi. Stay inside." But Naomi was already grabbing her shawl. At 24, she'd long outgrown her father's protective restrictions. Besides, she was the closest thing to a Dr. Redemption Creek had since old Doc Miller passed last winter. The stranger's horse stumbled to a stop at the hitching post. The man, tall and broad-shouldered despite his weakened state, slid from the saddle, nearly collapsing as his boots hit dirt. His right hand clutched his left arm, blood seeping through the sleeve of his dust-covered shirt. "Sir," Naomi called, approaching cautiously. "Are you in need of assistance?" The man raised his head, and Naomi's breath caught. Despite the grime and exhaustion etched into his face, he was strikingly handsome, strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," he managed, voice rough as gravel, "had some trouble with bandits about 10 miles back." He staggered, and Naomi rushed forward, sliding under his uninjured arm to steady him. "Pa, help me get him inside." Together, they guided the stranger through the store to their living quarters in the back. Once seated at the kitchen table, Naomi could better assess his injuries. "I'm Naomi Porter. This is my father, Walter." "Yates," the man said, wincing as Naomi gently examined his bloodied arm. "Yates Sutherland. You've been shot, Mr. Sutherland," Naomi said, carefully rolling up his sleeve to reveal a nasty bullet graze. "Just Yates, please." His eyes met hers briefly before darting away. "And yes, madam, I'm well aware." There was something guarded about him, Naomi thought, something beyond the pain of his wound. His right hand remained firmly gloved, and he kept it close to his body, protective. "Well, Yates, you're lucky. The bullet only grazed you. I can clean and bandage this, but you should rest afterward." Walter hovered nearby, suspicious. "What brings you to Redemption Creek, Mr. Sutherland? We don't get many strangers these days." Yates tensed, "Just passing through, heading to Fort Laramie." "You a lawman?" Walter pressed. "No, sir, just a man looking for work." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Naomi was more concerned with his immediate well-being than his past. "Pa, could you fetch my medical supplies? And perhaps some of that whiskey you keep hidden behind the flour sacks?" Walter grumbled, but did as asked. When they were alone, Naomi noticed how Yates surveyed the room, noting exits and windows, the habits of a man accustomed to trouble. "Whatever you're running from," she said quietly, "you're safe here for now." His eyes snapped to hers, surprise flashing across his face before the guarded expression returned. "I'm not running, Miss Porter. Of course not," she smiled gently, "and it's just Naomi." Over the next hour, Naomi cleaned and bandaged Yates's arm wound. He remained stoic throughout, barely flinching even when she poured whiskey over the open flesh. She'd tended many injuries over the years: ranch hands with crushed fingers, miners with broken bones, children with fevers, but something about this man's quiet endurance touched her. "You're good at this," he observed as she tied off the bandage. "Necessity makes for a quick education." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "My mother died when I was 16. Someone had to tend to the sick and injured. Your town's lucky to have you." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? I'll make camp outside town." Walter, who'd been silently watching from across the room, finally spoke up. "Nonsense, the livery has a room. Samuel won't charge much, especially if you help him with chores once that arm heals a bit." Yates seemed about to refuse, but exhaustion won out. "That's mighty kind, I'd be obliged." After Walter left to speak with Samuel at the livery, Naomi offered Yates some stew. As he ate, she couldn't help noticing how he favored his right hand, keeping it partially hidden despite the glove that covered it completely. Your other hand, she said carefully. Is it injured as well? The shutters came down immediately in his eyes. It's nothing, old injury. I could take a look. No. The word came out sharper than he likely intended. More gently, he added, thank you, but it's been seen to, long ago. Naomi nodded, recognizing a boundary when she encountered one. Still, curiosity and concern lingered. Yates Sutherland stayed in Redemption Creek for 3 days, helping Samuel with repairs around the livery despite his injured arm. Each day, he stopped by the general store, ostensibly to have Naomi check his bandages. Each visit lasted longer than necessary, their conversations evolving from polite exchanges to genuine interest. She learned he'd grown up in Texas, had worked cattle drives, and had spent 2 years panning for gold in California before heading east again. What he didn't share the gaps in his story intrigued her as much as what he did reveal. On the 4th day, as a spring thunderstorm rolled across the plains, Sheriff Tom Bradley rode into town with news. Bank robbery over in Sweetwater, he announced to the men gathered at the saloon. 3 men killed the teller and got away with nearly $4,000, heading this way, according to witnesses. Naomi, who'd been delivering medicine to the saloon keeper's wife, felt her blood run cold. She glanced at Yates, who stood near the bar, his face unreadable. Later that afternoon, as rain pounded against the general store's roof, Yates found her stacking canned goods. I'll be leaving at first light, he said without preamble. Disappointment settled heavy in her chest. Because of the bank robbers, his eyes widened slightly. No. My business in Fort Laramie won't wait much longer. Of course. She turned back to the shelves, embarrassed by her presumption. Your arm should heal nicely, provided you keep it clean, Naomi. Something in his voice made her turn around. He stood closer now, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. I'm not one of those bank robbers. I never said you didn't have to. I saw the question in your eyes. He sighed, running his ungloved left hand through his dark hair. I understand suspicion. A stranger rides into town shot, secretive about his past. I'd be suspicious too. Then why are you leaving? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. For a moment she thought he might actually answer truthfully. Instead, he simply said, it's better this way. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. Rain continued to fall, a steady drumming against the roof that usually soothed her but now only amplified her restlessness. Something about Yates Sutherland had gotten under her skin in a way no man ever had before. Near midnight, she heard hoofbeats in the muddy street, voices raised in anger, then a gunshot. She rushed to the window in time to see 3 riders dismounting outside the saloon, their faces obscured by bandanas, the bank robbers. Without waking her father, Naomi grabbed her shawl and slipped out the back door. The livery was only 100 yards behind the general store. If she could warn Yates, she made it halfway across the open ground when a hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled, kicking backward, until a familiar voice whispered, Easy, it's me. Yates released her and she spun to face him, rain plastering her nightdress to her skin. The robbers, I know. I spotted them from my window. His face was grim in the darkness. You need to get inside, lock your doors. What about you? A flash of lightning illuminated his features, determined, dangerous in a way she hadn't seen before. I'll handle it. You're 1 man against 3 killers. I've faced worse odds. He glanced toward the saloon. Sheriff Bradley's out of town, checking on a homestead dispute. Those men will tear this town apart looking for valuables. We have a safe in the store, Naomi admitted. Not much in it, but they won't know that. Yates nodded. Get back inside, block the door with something heavy. Before she could argue, he was moving toward the street, staying in the shadows. Naomi hesitated only briefly before following him. If he was going to risk his life for her town, she wouldn't cower inside. She caught up to him at the corner of the saddle shop. I'm coming with you. Damn it, Naomi, I know every building in this town, you don't. She met his glare with equal intensity. And I can shoot. A commotion from the saloon interrupted their standoff. The doors burst open, and 2 men dragged the saloon keeper into the street, throwing him into the mud. Where's the money? One shouted, kicking the prone figure. Town this size must have a bank. No bank, the saloon keeper gasped. General store, they keep a safe. Naomi's heart sank. Yates gripped her arm. Is there another way into your store besides the front and back? The cellar door. Behind the rain barrel, Go now. Get your father upstairs, hidden. This time, Naomi didn't argue. She slipped through the rain to the back of the general store, easing open the cellar door and climbing down into the darkness. She knew every creaky board, every turn in the narrow space. When she emerged into the store, she found her father already awake, shotgun in hand. Bandits, she whispered, explaining the situation as quickly as possible. Walter's face hardened. Get upstairs, Naomi. Papa, no, I won't argue. Go. Before either could move, the front door splintered inward. Two masked men entered, guns drawn. The third remained outside, presumably watching the street. Evening, folks, the taller one drawled. Here you've got a safe that needs emptying. Walter raised his shotgun. You boys picked the wrong town. What happened next unfolded with terrible swiftness. The second robber fired, the bullet striking Walter in the shoulder. He collapsed with a cry of pain as Naomi screamed, rushing to his side. The safe, the tall robber demanded, pressing his gun to Naomi's temple. Open it now or the next bullet goes through your pretty head. It's in the back office, Naomi said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'll open it, just don't hurt him anymore, smart girl. The man yanked her to her feet. Zeke, watch the old man. The robber called Zeke kept his gun trained on Walter while his companion forced Naomi toward the office. Her mind raced. The safe contained the store's earnings for the month, not a fortune, but enough that these men would feel cheated, angry. What would they do then? As they reached the office door, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the storeroom. Yates moved like a mountain lion, silent and deadly. Before the tall robber could turn, Yates struck him across the back of the head with his gun. The man crumpled and Yates caught him before he could crash to the floor. Stay here, he whispered to Naomi, lowering the unconscious man. Lenny, Zeke called from the front. You get that safe open yet? Yates moved to the doorway, keeping to the shadows. Naomi's heart pounded as she watched him calculate his next move. Walter lay still on the floor, blood seeping from his shoulder wound. The third robber's voice came from outside. Ryder's coming, we need to go now. Zeke cursed. Lenny, we're leaving. When no answer came, he backed toward the office, gun still trained on Walter. The moment he crossed the threshold, Yates struck. The two men grappled, Zeke's gun discharging into the ceiling as Yates fought for control of the weapon. Naomi grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk and swung it with all her might, catching Zeke on the temple. He staggered, and Yates delivered a knockout blow with his gloved right hand. Your father, Yates said, already moving toward Walter. Together they assessed the wound. The bullet had gone through cleanly, but Walter had lost considerable blood. He needs a doctor, Naomi said, applying pressure with a cloth. Sheriff's posse is coming, Yates reminded her. They'll have someone with medical knowledge. He was right. Within 20 minutes, Sheriff Bradley and 6 armed men rode into Redemption Creek. The third bank robber had fled, but they captured him 2 miles outside town. With the sheriff came his deputy, who had enough medical training to properly treat Walter's wound. As dawn broke, painting the rain-washed town in soft gold light, Naomi found Yates standing on the porch of the general store, watching the street come to life. You're still leaving, she said. It wasn't a question, he nodded, not turning to face her. More so now than before. Why? You're a hero, the whole town saw what you did. That's precisely why I need to go. He finally looked at her, his expression pained. Those men weren't just bank robbers, Naomi. They're part of the Blackwell gang. I recognized Zeke Taylor and he recognized me. I don't understand. Yates sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. 3 years ago I rode with them, not as a robber, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I was hired as security for a cattle sale. Didn't know until too late that the cattle were stolen, that Harrison Blackwell was using the sale as cover for other crimes. What happened? When I found out, I tried to leave. Blackwell doesn't let people walk away with what they know. His voice grew distant. There was a fight. A fire in the camp. I got trapped in a burning wagon. His gloved right hand flexed unconsciously. Naomi's eyes were drawn to it, understanding dawning. Your hand. Yates nodded grimly. Badly burned, scarred beyond recognition. But I got away with my life, which is more than I can say for the 2 men who died in that fire. Blackwell blamed me for their deaths, put a bounty on my head. You've been running ever since. Moving, not running, he corrected, a hint of his usual humor returning. But yes. I've been looking for work far from Texas, somewhere Blackwell's name isn't known. Naomi processed this information, piecing together the man before her with the fragments of his past. You could stay here. Sheriff Bradley would vouch for you after what you did, until Blackwell sends more men. I won't risk bringing that danger to your door. She wanted to argue to find some solution that didn't involve him riding away. In just a few days, he'd become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. At least stay until Papa's stronger, she suggested. Another week. Then if you still want to leave, something in her voice must have reached him because his expression softened. 1 week. That week stretched into 2, then a month. Yates took odd jobs around town mending fences at the Peterson farm, breaking horses for the livery, even helping Walter reorganize the stockroom once the older man could move around again. Each evening he joined the Porters for dinner, and afterward he and Naomi would sit on the porch, talking until the stars filled the sky. She learned about his childhood on a small ranch outside San Antonio, how he'd lost both parents to cholera when he was 17, his dreams of someday having land of his own. He never removed his glove, and she never asked to see what lay beneath it, respecting his privacy even as her heart ached for his pain. In turn, she shared her own hopes of someday traveling east to study medicine properly, of seeing the ocean, of finding purpose beyond the confines of Redemption Creek. They were dreams she'd never voiced aloud, not even to her father, who expected her to marry a local boy and continue running the store after he was gone. You'd make a fine doctor, Yates told her one evening as they watched heat lightning flicker across the distant horizon. Better than most I've encountered. A woman doctor, most would say that's impossible. Most haven't met you. The quiet conviction in his voice made her cheeks warm. As June bloomed into July, Naomi realized she was falling in love with Yates Sutherland. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. He'd stopped talking about leaving, had even leased a small cabin at the edge of town, but the shadow of Harrison Blackwell hung over them, unspoken but ever-present. On Independence Day, the town gathered for a celebration in the small square. There was music, dancing, food spread across long tables. For a few hours, everyone forgot their hardships, surrendering to the simple joy of community. Under the glow of paper lanterns, Yates asked Naomi to dance. His left hand rested lightly on her waist, his gloved right hand held carefully away as they moved to the fiddle's melody. I never learned to dance properly, he confessed, a rare self-consciousness in his voice. You're doing fine, she smiled up at him, though you could hold me closer. I won't break, something darkened in his eyes. It's not you I'm worried about. She understood then he kept his distance because of his hand, afraid it might repulse her or that he might accidentally hurt her with it. Yates, she said softly, nothing about you could ever push me away. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. A group of riders entered town, dusty and armed. At their center rode a man with a silver beard and cold eyes, Harrison Blackwell himself. Yates stiffened, immediately putting himself between Naomi and the newcomers. Around them, the music died, conversations faltering as the townspeople sensed the sudden tension. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, hand resting on his gun. Something I can help you gentlemen with. Blackwell's gaze swept the crowd, finally landing on Yates. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his weathered face. Sutherland, he called. Thought that might be you. Zeke recognized. You've led us on quite a chase. Yates's voice carried across the now silent square. I've got no quarrel with you, Blackwell, not anymore. You burned 2 of my men alive. I'd call that a quarrel. Blackwell dismounted, his men following suit. Step away from these good people. This is between us. Naomi felt Yates's muscles tense beneath her hand. Don't, she whispered, not like this. But Yates was already moving forward, placing himself in open ground between Blackwell's men and the townspeople. Naomi looked frantically around, catching Sheriff Bradley's eye. The older lawman gave a subtle nod, and she saw that several townsmen were quietly positioning themselves, weapons ready. You want me, Blackwell? Here I am. Yates stood tall, unafraid. But your version of events is wrong. I didn't kill those men. You left them to die when the fire started, just like you left me. Blackwell's face contorted with rage. I dare speak the truth. You sacrificed your own men to save your stolen goods, then put a bounty on my head to cover your cowardice. Murmurs rippled through both groups. Naomi could see uncertainty in the faces of some of Blackwell's men. This wasn't the story they'd been told. "Enough talk," Blackwell snarled, drawing his pistol with lightning speed. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Blackwell fired, the bullet grazing Yates's temple. Yates drew and returned fire in one fluid motion, his bullet finding its mark in Blackwell's shoulder. The outlaw leader staggered but didn't fall. As both men prepared to fire again, Sheriff Bradley's voice boomed across the square. "Hold, the next man who pulls a trigger answers to me and 20 armed citizens." Sure enough, the townspeople had formed a formidable barrier, rifles and shotguns trained on Blackwell's gang. "This isn't your fight," Blackwell growled at Bradley. "It became my fight when you brought guns to my town celebration." The sheriff's voice was steel. "Now you've got two choices. Ride out now, never return, and I forget I ever saw the man with $1,000 bounty on his head in 5 territories. Or resist, and I'll have the pleasure of collecting that bounty myself after we bury what's left of you." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then one of Blackwell's men, an older rider with a sensible face, spoke up. "Harrison, we came for Sutherland, not to die in some Wyoming backwater. The boy might be right about what happened in that fire." Jenkins said something similar before he passed. Blackwell's expression flickered between rage and calculation. Finally, pragmatism won out. "This isn't over, Sutherland," he spat, holstering his weapon and remounting with difficulty, blood staining his shirt. "It is for me," Yates replied evenly. "Has been for 3 years." As Blackwell and his men rode out of town, tension slowly dissipated from the square. Naomi rushed to Yates, examining the bleeding graze on his temple. "You need stitches," she said, her hands trembling slightly as the danger fully registered. Yates caught her wrist gently. "Naomi, not here," she interrupted, suddenly aware of the crowd watching them. "Come to the store, I'll treat that wound." In the quiet of the general store's back room, as Naomi carefully cleaned and stitched the graze, neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Yates broke the silence. "He'll be back or send others. As long as I stay here, Redemption Creek will be a target." Naomi tied off the final stitch. "So you're leaving again?" "I have to." "No," she set down her instruments with deliberate care. "You don't." "Naomi, Blackwell is injured. His men are questioning him. Sheriff Bradley essentially threatened him with arrest if he returns." She met Yates's eyes squarely. "And even if he does come back, this town will stand together just like we did tonight. I can't ask that of people." "You didn't ask, we chose." She took a deep breath. "I choose to stand with you, Yates Sutherland, not out of obligation or pity, but because I've fallen in love with you." The naked vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "How can you love me," he whispered, "when I'm damaged?" Without breaking eye contact, Naomi reached for his right hand. He flinched but didn't pull away as she slowly, carefully removed the leather glove. The scarring was extensive, shiny, twisted skin covering most of his hand and extending partway up his wrist. She heard his breath catch as she gently traced the contours of the old injury. "Does it hurt still?" She asked softly. "Sometimes. Mostly it's just stiff, doesn't work right anymore." Naomi brought his scarred hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to the center of his palm. "You're whole, Yates," she whispered against his skin. "Scars and all, you're whole." Something broke open in his expression, years of shame and isolation crumbling in the face of her acceptance. He pulled her to him with his good arm, burying his face in her hair. "I love you, Naomi Porter," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "God help me, I've tried not to, but I do." "Then stay, build a life here with me." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes, searching for any hint of doubt and finding none. "If I stay, I want to do it properly." His scarred hand cupped her cheek. "Marry me," joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, the entire population of Redemption Creek in attendance. Sheriff Bradley stood as Yates's best man, and Mary Peterson, Naomi's childhood friend, served as maid of honor. Walter, arm still in a sling but recovering well, proudly walked his daughter down the aisle. With the money he'd saved over years of drifting, Yates purchased 20 acres of land outside town. Together with friends and neighbors, they raised a modest house and barn. Naomi continued to provide medical care to the townspeople, with Yates's full support of her ambitions. The following spring, a letter arrived from San Francisco. A former gang member had testified against Harrison Blackwell, detailing years of crimes including the murder of a federal marshal. Blackwell had been arrested and sentenced to hang. The bounty on Yates's head was officially rescinded, the charges of arson and murder proven false. That night, sitting on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Yates took off his glove and set it aside. "Might not need this anymore," he said, flexing his scarred hand in the fading light. Naomi laced her fingers through his. "Wear it if it makes you comfortable, don't if it doesn't. Either way, I love this hand," she smiled. "It's part of the man I love." Yates pulled her close, marveling at how a woman's acceptance had healed wounds far deeper than those that marked his skin. For the first time since that burning wagon, he felt truly whole. As darkness fell across the plains, bringing with it a canopy of stars, Naomi rested her head against Yates's shoulder. "I have news," she whispered. "What kind of news?" She guided his scarred hand to rest against her still flat stomach. "By winter, there will be 3 of us." The look of wonder that transformed his face was something Naomi knew she would treasure forever. In that moment, under the vast Wyoming sky, their future stretched before them, not without challenges, but filled with a love that had survived fire, bullets, and the ghosts of the past. For a man who had spent years believing himself broken, and a woman who had dreamed of a life beyond the confines of her small town, they had found in each other not just love, but wholeness. And in the wild heart of the American West, that was the greatest treasure of all.